Ever wondered what's actually happening inside your body when you push it to the absolute limit? I mean, think back to the 2008 Olympic Games. An unbelievable 25 swimming world records were shattered, just totally blown out of the water. And no, it wasn't some sudden leap in human evolution. Almost every single one of those athletes was wearing this specific swimsuit, the Speedo LZR. It was actually inspired by the microscopic structure of shark skin, and it cut down drag so effectively that they literally had to ban it from competitive swimming. Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're popping the hood on the ultimate machine, the human body.
All right, so here's our roadmap for today. We're going to kick things off with the science of movement. Then we'll look at what sparks the muscle engine, how we fuel the machine, and the support systems, your heart, lungs, and hormones. Finally, we'll wrap up with the anatomy of muscle itself and how we build a better body. Part 1. The science of movement, from ancient Greece to modern labs. So exercise physiology at its core is really just the study of how physical activity impacts our internal systems. How it challenges our body's baseline, our homeostasis. And honestly, we've known exercise is good for us for a long time. The ancient Greek physicians, guys like Hippocrates, they were totally onto this. But the real, massive, modern scientific leap, that hit in the 1920s. In 1922, Archibald Hill and Otto Meyerhof actually snagged a Nobel Prize for cracking the code on muscle metabolism. And then, boom, just 5 years later, the famous Harvard Fatigue Lab opens its doors, basically giving birth to the modern science of pushing the human body. But here's the cool thing about science. It's always evolving. In fact, one of Archibald Hill's original century-old ideas turned out to be a complete myth. Seriously, you've probably heard it a million times, right? The idea that lactic acid pooling in your muscles is what causes that deep burn and that awful next-day soreness. Well, fact check, lactate doesn't cause soreness at all. It's definitely a byproduct of hard work, sure, but your body quickly shuttles it over to the liver where it's recycled into fresh ATP. It's actually more fuel, not the enemy. Which brings us to part 2, sparking the muscle engine, or the neuromuscular ignition.
Let's zoom way, way in on the exact microscopic moment you actually decide to move. It all starts at the neuromuscular junction. This is basically the ignition switch for your body's engine, relying on a process called excitation-contraction coupling. Sounds super intimidating, I know, but it really just means that for a muscle to fire, it needs an electrical spark first. Your brain sends a signal zipping down a nerve, which triggers the release of a chemical called acetylcholine. That chemical jumps across a tiny gap, hits the muscle fiber, and boom, fires an electrical current and action potential right into the belly of the muscle. And once that spark hits, we get what's known as the sliding filament model. Think of this kind of like the pistons in a car engine. First, that electrical signal forces calcium to rush into the muscle cell. Then, that calcium acts like a key. It binds to a protein called troponin, which unshields the binding sites on our actin filaments. Next, ATP, which is our body's energy currency, steps in to prime the myosin heads. And finally, we get the power stroke. The myosin grabs the actin, pulls it hard, and physically shortens the muscle. It's crazy to think about, but that microscopic pull happening millions of times over is what lets you lift a barbell, run a sprint, or just blink your eyes. All right, part 3, fueling the machine, the systems that power us. To keep those biological pistons firing, we obviously need fuel. But here's the catch. Our muscles only store enough ATP for a few seconds of intense work. So how do we keep going without just shutting down? Well, the body brilliantly divides our fuel needs into 3 distinct energy systems. Say you're doing a heavy deadlift. You're tapping into the ATP PCR system, which gives you raw, explosive energy for maybe 15 seconds. Push past that, like during a grueling 60-second basketball shift, and your anaerobic glycolytic system takes over, burning up blood glucose without needing oxygen. But what if you're running a marathon? That's when you shift gears into the oxidative system, where you start burning carbs and fats using oxygen to keep you moving for hours. And let me just emphasize how crucial that oxidative system is. 34. That is the number of ATP molecules your oxidative system can pump out from just one single molecule of glucose. Put that next to the glycolytic system, which only manages to squeeze out 2 ATP from that same glucose molecule, and you start to realize that your aerobic engine is just absurdly efficient. Moving on to part 4, heart, lungs, and hormones, the support systems. So if ATP is the fuel, your cardiovascular and respiratory systems are the heavy-duty fuel pumps. They're ramping up your heart rate, increasing stroke volume, and pushing your breathing to rush oxygen right to those working muscles. And if you want to measure the absolute ceiling of this delivery system, exercise physiologists use a VO2 max test. By putting someone on a treadmill with a metabolic mask to track their breathing, scientists can pinpoint the maximum amount of oxygen the body can possibly use.
It's pretty much the gold standard for testing overall cardiovascular fitness. But while you're gasping for air on that treadmill, there's a whole chemical symphony playing out behind the scenes. Exercise triggers these massive spikes in insulin and glucagon, making sure your blood sugar is perfectly balanced to feed your muscles. At the same time, your brain dumps catecholamines, think adrenaline, to mobilize stored energy and really force your heart to beat harder. Then, the second you finish the workout, your body floods the system with growth hormone and testosterone to kickstart protein synthesis and get those tissues rebuilding. Which leads us nicely into part 5, the anatomy of muscle. Skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. The really wild thing here is that all this fuel, oxygen, and hormonal signaling isn't just going to one type of muscle. It's being delivered to 3 highly specialized tissues. We talk a lot about skeletal muscle. Those are the striated muscles we consciously flex to move our bones. But what about the heart? Cardiac muscle is completely involuntary, and its cells are uniquely wired together via intercalated discs. This means the entire heart beats as one synchronized, continuous wave, known as a syncytium. And then you have smooth muscle, which lines your blood vessels and organs. Smooth muscle uses this incredibly clever mechanism called latch bridges that lets it hold tension for literally hours, like keeping your blood pressure stable while burning almost zero energy. Now, even within our conscious skeletal muscle, the specialization is just mind-blowing. Muscle fibers basically split into 2 camps, fast twitch and slow twitch. A sprinter, for example, is relying heavily on fast twitch fibers because they fire off rapidly for pure explosive power. On the flip side, a Tour de France cyclist leans completely into their slow twitch fibers. Those are packed full of mitochondria and are built entirely for sustained, hyper-efficient endurance. And that brings us to our final section, part 6, building a better body, composition and adaptation. All this crazy microscopic cellular activity we've been talking about, it ultimately manifests as long-term physical adaptations and real changes in your body composition. Physiologists track all this using super accurate tools like DEXA scans or hydrostatic weighing underwater. And it's important to note that healthy body fat ranges differ biologically depending on who you are. For male athletes, the target is usually between 6 to 14% body fat, whereas female athletes look at 14 to 20% to maintain optimal hormonal and metabolic health. The physical consequences of our habits are pretty stark. When we consistently put the body under the stress of resistance training, we trigger hypertrophy. We are literally packing new structural proteins into our muscle fibers, making them thicker and stronger. But on the flip side, through disuse or just normal aging, we see atrophy, specifically something called sarcopenia. This is the age-related loss of muscle mass, and it leads straight to weakness, as muscle fibers actually die off and get replaced by fat and connective tissue. It's just a harsh reality of biology, but it's one we can fight. And here is the incredibly good news. Looking ahead, the entire field of exercise physiology is shifting toward precision exercise medicine. We are stepping into an era where wearable tech, real-time biomarker tracking, and even your own genetic profile will tell us exactly how your personal engine is running. We won't be guessing about sets and reps anymore. We'll be customizing our training right down to the cellular level. So, we've journeyed from the tiny electric spark of a single nerve all the way up to the full-body mechanics of an elite athlete. We know for a fact that consistent exercise is the absolute best, scientifically proven way to fight off age-related muscle decay and fine-tune this incredible biological machine. So, knowing all that, what changes are you going to make to your own routine today? Something to chew on the next time you're lacing up your shoes for a workout. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.